Hello and welcome to Dice Tabletop. My name is Chris and today we're going to be doing a Space Marine Terminator Captain. I am feeling a little bit burnt out from the hobby, if I'm honest. I've been doing the Warlord Titan now for about 18-19 months. So I want to do something a little bit different, a little bit fresh. Now you might remember from a previous video I'm collecting the Combat Patrol magazines that are out here in the UK at the moment. And in the first episode we got this Space Marine Terminator Captain and I absolutely fell in love with him. This sculpt is amazing and for the first time it sort of really invigorated something within me. But he sat on a shelf just because I've been focusing on the Warlord Titan at the moment, and I want to come now and give him some attention. So starting off, we are drilling out the gun barrels. This is an absolute must. The previous video that I did on Combat Patrol was sort of if you're new and getting into it. This is not going to be this type of video. I'm going in really hard and trying to do the best that I can on this model, using things that might not be available to you as a beginner. Now, despite the amount of time that I've been in the hobby, I've never actually collected Space Marines. I've never really looked twice at them. I've been so much more interested in all the other factions. So this, I'm pretty sure, is going to be the first Space Marine that I have properly built and painted. Starting off then, we need to get some texture down on the base, and for that I'm using a very fine sand and the Army Painter's brown battleground rocks, making a mix of these two here in this nice old goo pot. It really perfectly replicates a really good battleground look that we can then build up to be whether industrial or forest themed, whatever we want. Next we're coming in with PVA glue and smearing this all over the areas that we want that sand to be stuck to. Once we've got a good even coat over everywhere that we need to be covered, we're coming in now with our mix and just sprinkling that all into the PVA glue, making sure that we're getting it nice and saturated, we've got no blank areas at all. The next step then, now that that's dried, is we can come in and we can get our base coat applied, and for this I'm just going to be using a really simple black. Now, I don't know what's been up with my airbrush recently. It seems just to be starting to give up the ghost on me. It's not working as good as it used to. I gave it a really good ultrasonic clean the other day, and it's just, it's on its way out. So if you've got any recommendations of a good airbrush, I am in the market. So drop a comment down below of one that you would recommend. I'd really like to check that out. So, now that the base coat is applied, we can start to build up our colour. I'm starting with a slightly slap chop style approach to this. We're going to be starting off with a medium sea grey, dry brushing this all over the model, getting a really good even coverage. Once that's been applied, we're then going to come on over the top with a slightly brighter grey. This is going to allow us to pick up lots of light on all the raised surfaces and keep the dark black underneath for all the shadows. To finish off then, we're just using a little bit of white, and this is on all the upmost surfaces where all the most light would catch. Okie doke, here we have it, and if you're familiar with Slapshot, this will look no stranger to you. But this is where we're going to start differentiating away from Slap Chop. As opposed to coming in with a speed paint, I'm thinning down Macragge Blue, and we're going to be building this up in several thin coats all over the blue. This is going to enable us to keep a lot of that light colour that we've created by the dry brushing underneath it, and although it doesn't come across too well on camera, you can start to see it here. There's just a nice tonal range within this blue. It's lighter towards the surfaces that would be closer to the light, and it's darker underneath in all of the shadows. So here is the result after about 3 thin coats of that being applied. You can see it's still got a nice shine underneath, looks metallic, it hasn't detracted too much away from that blue, and it's not one solid block of colour. Next it's time to base coat all of the metal trim on this, and I am going for a gold, and I'm using Glorious Gold by Vallejo. Now this is a gold that I picked up in just a random paint set that I bought. You know what it's like, you get like 10 colours in a pack. This was a gold in there, and I thought I'd give it a try, and my god, this is my new favourite gold. If you remember Shining Gold from back in the day, when Games Workshop paints used to be a screw top, it is literally that colour of gold. It was such an immaculate gold tone. It's a great, also you can now pick it up from Coat d'Arms of course, but just Gehenna's Gold and the others really just do not touch this Glorious Gold. Carrying on with our base coating then, we are using Skeleton Bone by the Army Painter, and we are coming on and just doing all of these little bits of accents on the armour. We've got one on the shoulder panel there, and another one down on the right leg. We're also using it as well to fill in the banner on the right shoulder pad. We've got a few purity seals that need to be blocked in as well, so we're going to be using Barbarian Flesh for this. This is a nice sort of darker version of the Skeleton Bone. It's going to help us create, well, all of these colours for the accents of the shoulder and the purity seals will end up being roughly the same, it does allow us to create just enough of a separation within there that it doesn't look like there's just 3 colours all over the model. Next up, we're just coming in and blacking out anything that I don't want to have this dry brush effect on, so that's going to be the handle and hilt of the sword. We've got some pipes there connecting from the shoulders, as well as the top of the gun. Once that is done, we can now come in and we can start applying all of our metal tone. We're starting off with gun metal. This is a really nice dark metal. Building up 2 thin coats of this all over, I find that it helps bring a little bit of that blackness through to really help accentuate and make that metal look realistic. That's the majority of our base coats now applied, so we can start doing some shading. So I'm going to be using Reikland Flesh Shade, and I'm coming over and putting these on the purity seals, as well as these bits of detail that you see on the shoulders, on the knees, as well as all of the gold. And we can't forget the silver bits, so they get a bit of Nuln Oil. Right, now it's time for a big challenge for me. I want to paint this cape, and we're going to start off with a gory red. Now, I'm not very good at layering and blending, so I want to get better at that. So I've got a nice selection of reds as well as black to help put some shadows in there. And I want to have a go at starting off and building up this and getting a really nice red cape where you see a nice tonal range between a nice bright red on all the creases and a dark red in the contrasting areas. Here is how it looks after we put 2 thin coats of that gore red down. Next, we're going to be building up our first highlight colour with a dragon red. So we're starting off wide with our application of this, and we'll be gradually getting narrower and narrower to the peak of all of these creases and highlights as we build through not only this colour, the forthcoming colours as well. Now, one downside was, as I started to build up these layers of red, it did add a sheen to the cape itself. Later on, I ended up knocking that back with a matte varnish, so if it looks a little bit shiny or at this moment in time, don't worry, it all comes together in the end. So here we have it. Now that I've finished with the blood red highlight, it's hard to see on camera, that gloss does detract from it a little bit, but I'm really happy with the way that this turned out. So we're going to move on now, and next up we're going to be doing all of the actual purity seal, the little wax seals themselves. We're just going to be using blood red for that. Moving on, we can start building up on some of this detail now, and we're going to be focusing on these accents that we did earlier in skeleton bone. Now we're going to be coming back over the top of these with a bone white. This is going to be thinned down, and we're not going too crazy on it. We want to make sure that we're keeping the detail, so we're taking our time, thinning the paint, putting 2 coats on if we need to. What this has done now is it's left a little bit of that skeleton bone in the background, just for a nice bit of extra range to that colour itself. And for the shoulder banner, it was a matter of just edge highlighting it, leaving that nice dark colour in the middle for a shadow. The purity seals get our attention next, and we're coming back with Barbarian Flesh. That was our base tone, and we're starting to use this as a highlight now around the Reikland Flesh shade, leaving that in all of the deepest recesses and starting to build up now to what's going to be our highlight colour, which is going to come in and be a mix of the bone white and the Barbarian Flesh. So there we have it, the purity seals are done, as well as the accents on the shoulder and the knee. Next up, we have got to highlight all of the metal. We're going to be coming back in with glorious gold again, picking out just all the very edges and those fine details that we want. Next on the list then is going to be edge highlighting this armor. Now that is something that I have absolutely sucked at in the past, so why not just give it a go on an ultra clean ultramarine? Thankfully though, we got those shoulder shields to practice on before committing to the full model. I'm starting off with Adriatic Blue by Scale 75. This looks to be a really good colour in between the Macragge Blue and Blue Horror, which ends up being my final highlight tone. So we're taking our time here, not loading up the brush too much. We've thinned down the paint ever so slightly, but not too much so that it is all running all over the place and is unworkable. And we're using the edge of our brush, as I say, taking our time and just capturing all of those edges. Now they're not perfect, but they're not bad either. As I say, these are just test pieces. I'm going to be coming back and reworking these specific shields later on when on the model. I'm going to end up repainting one anyway. But now that I've got my eye in with that, let's just take our time, go over the whole model. It did take a little while, Don't be afraid when you're doing this. You really need to move the model around and make it work to your brush. Don't try and work your brush to the model. You can put this in any funky orientation that you need. Just make sure that you've got a nice straight line. It's going to make it the easiest as possible to get a crisp, clean edge highlight. Right, first edge highlight down, and I'm quite happy with how this has turned out. Sort of halfway through, I got a little bit of a rhythm with it, and haven't conquered my edge highlighting abilities by any stretch, but I think certainly on the right track. So whilst we got a little bit of a flow, let's come and do the silver as well. Next up, it's time for our final edge highlight all over this armor, and we're going to be using Blue Horror for this. This is a really nice bright blue that's going to sit right at the top of the light range now, and it's going to pick up all of our sharpest edges. So what we're doing is we're coming in really thinly with this, trying to leave some of that Adriatic blue so you can really see the difference, and once you start building it all up, visually, the three colors help blend themselves together really well, and you've got a nice, sharp, crisp tone on the edge of all of the armor. And here is the result of what that process looks like. Now, as I say, I am nowhere near a professional when it comes to edge highlighting, but this process really did help me get into a bit of a rhythm with it, and I'm really looking forward now to painting more Space Marines. It's not as that much of a daunting task as I first thought, so if you're scared of edge highlighting like me, don't be, just take your time, get in there and give it a go. Now next we're coming up and we're just painting all of these little rivets that we need to just with silver, as well as putting a highlight onto all of the wax purity seals. Now our handsome chappy here has spent too long without any colour on his face, so let's get that done. Starting off here with rosy flesh, applying 2 thin coats, making sure that we're not getting anything in the mouth itself. We want to leave that nice and black. Once those are dried, we're coming in and we're painting the 2 service studs in his forehead silver. Faces is another thing that is not my strong point as well when it comes to painting. In fact, most of painting is not my strong point really. So what we're going to do is we're going to kick things off here with a flesh wash. We're going to keep it nice and simple. I built up about 3 coats of this in total. I thinned it down. When doing a flesh wash, I found in the past it's always better to thin it down and build it up over time. You get a really nice gradual, as you can see there, a nice gradual colour to that skin, as opposed to putting it on really thick for the first time and you losing some of that detail. I then came over that with a thinned down elf skin tone on the very edge of the brush, thinly dragging it over all of the raised areas just to pick up all of the highlights there in the face, as well as coming back and reapplying some highlight back to those service studs and picking the teeth out. Now, I'm quite happy with how this has turned out. I've done a couple of experiments on this model so far, so I'm not going to go crazy and try and do some insane detailed face. I'm going to leave it like that. But moving forward, I do want to get better at painting faces. Next up, let's do something a little bit easier and focus on the sword. So we're going to be blanking this out with a lead belcher for the main blade, as well as our glorious gold that we're going to do there on the hilt detail. We're returning to our 2 trusty washes from earlier, Reikland Flesh Shade and Nuln Oil. The Nuln Oil is going to be going on the blade of the sword, and the Reikland Flesh Shade is going to be going all over the gold. Once that Nuln Oil dried, I then came back in with Silver by Vallejo and put an edge highlight over all of the blade and tried to pick out those letters the best that I could that are in the detail of the blade itself. And finally for the sword, it was time to come back in with that silver colour and just pick out all the little rivets that are on it. Right, it's time to move on and start getting some of the base done. Kicking it off then with medium sea grey, I'm going over all of the rocks and getting those base coated out. For the Tyrannid he's proudly conquered, we're coming in then with Wraith Bone. Then Baraknar Burgundy for the scales. And lastly, we draw our attention then to the ground itself. We're going to be using Oak Brown just to get a real nice muddy look, making sure that you drop the bottle. Next up, I want to start building some details now into the scales and carapace that is on this Tyrannid, so we're going to be using Thunderhawk Blue, And in a streaking motion, we're going to build this up as well as building up the brightness by mixing Thunderhawk Blue with a little bit of the Blue Horror to get an edge highlight. And by the end of it, we've got some nice texture there on the carapace and scales. The next step is to use some Stonewall Grey, and we're going to dry brush this now all over that rock just to get a little bit of tonal variance in it before coming back in the next stage and using our washes. And for those washes, we're going to be starting off with Nuln Oil, making sure to get a good coverage over that rock and that ground texture. And it was whilst applying this wash that I noticed I hadn't painted out these little bullet casings as well as this rebar in the concrete, so I've come back and I've added the detail into that, because in this next stage we're now going to be coming in with streaking grime, and we're going to be applying this all over, getting a really nice colour now into everything, making it look dirty like it's in the middle of a battlefield. Next, that gets a quick flash off with a hairdryer to dry it up a little bit before we come in with our white spirit. Dab that off with a sponge, and we remove a lot of that streaking grime, leaving that lovely tone that it creates. And there we have it, that colour has brought everything together. Now with a base, I don't like it to be too bright and too detracting from the model itself, so this is the perfect level of simplicity. We can come back over the top now with our Stonewall Grey on that rock and on that ground, and just bring some of that highlight colour back to it. Next up, let's turn our attention to the flames that we've got in the centre of this base here. So we're going to be base coating them out first of all with a really simple gore red like we did with the cape. Once that base coat was applied, I then came in with a series of oranges, moving up into yellow just to try and get a little bit of range within this fire. And by the end of it, I was somewhat happy with how this turned out. I've certainly seen better fire, but I've also definitely painted worse. And of course, a base isn't complete now without a painted rim just to bring it all together. So I like to come in and black out my rims just to have that nice crisp edge to it and to finish that base off. Now I managed to find an old Space Marine transfer sheet in a pile of loads of other transfer sheets that I had. So I've got an idea of a couple that can go on the shoulder, on the shield, maybe on the knee there as well. But before we can go ahead and do that, I do want to repaint now one of these shields. So I want this one to be white. First of all, we block this out with a grey because it's a really easy intermediary tone between our blue and our white. So we get a really nice coverage with our white when we go over the grey. So here is that transfer sheet. Some have already been used, and I did do a little test of one as well, just to make sure I remember what it is that I'm meant to do. So we've got some ultramarine symbols on the left there. I'm going to probably use a number, a black one and a white one as well. There's some other sort of skulls and potential symbols to be used. Now, if you are cutting out transfers, you need to make sure that you use a really good sharp blade. I'm actually using my beard scissors here because they're probably the sharpest scissors that I've got in the house. They enable me to get a really good even cut on this, not have any sort of splayed edges that might show on the transfer. Now we want to remove as much of the excess gumph as we can, and when we're using a transfer that's going to go on a shield, it's always good to put a little slit down the center of it, because when you apply that over a curved surface, it's going to help it to wrap around and you're not going to get any creases or it bubbling off. So to prep our area, we're just dipping our brush in the water, wetting it. This is going to mean now that when we put the transfer on, you can see it can slide easily on that surface and gives us a little bit of working time so that we can get it in the right place. Next up then is those shields, and we're starting off with the white one on the left. Now I used the Roman numeral here, number 10, the black X. I ended up not really liking that in the end, so there is a little bit of a continuity jump. By the time you end up seeing the end model, it'll have the 5V symbol on it. I just thought that ended up looking better in the end. But this is the exact same process now. We're cutting it out, getting as close to the decal as we can, wetting that surface area, and sliding that transfer on, making sure to get it nice and even. Once that is dried, it was a matter of just repeating the process now on the other shield, and coming in, I think I'm going to use this white number 2. That looks quite visually interesting, so let's go ahead and get that cut out and stuck on. There we are, we've got both of those dried. As you can see, I did swap back to the letter V Roman numeral 5, and I think that looks so much better. Now what we need to do is sort of knock the gloss out of this, and for that we're going to be using matte varnish. As I said earlier as well, we're also going to be using this on the cape to get rid of some of that shininess the layers of red have built up. So I've thinned this down ever so slightly with water, and what we're doing is we're just building this up now in layers until all of that gloss is gone. So here we have our finished Space Marine Terminator Captain, facing off against far too many Chaos Marines. He definitely losing this situation, but I am super happy now with how this has turned out, and I am feeling much more refreshed in the hobby. Coming up next then is going to be another Warlord Titan video. We are getting those armor panels finished off, we are finishing the base, which is leading us in perfectly for the weapons. I have finalized my plan of what I'm going to do. That is definitely something you're not going to want to miss. For those of you who watched the previous ones, unfortunately, my soldering skills are going to have to come back, but I'm much better this time. All that's left for me to say then is a big thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please subscribe, drop a comment down below on what you thought about my very first Space Marine. Those Titan videos I was on about are being filmed in the background, so it won't be much longer until those are out. So thank you ever so much again for watching, and I'll see you soon.